The Whispering Woods. In a small, quiet town surrounded by dense woods, a group of 5 kids, Ben, Lisa, Mark, Emily, and Sam, were known for their adventurous spirits. They were best friends who spent every summer exploring the vast, mysterious forest on the edge of town. The townsfolk called it the Whispering Woods, though no one seemed to know why. It was said that strange things happened there, but the children never believed in those old tales. One sweltering summer day, the group stumbled upon a clearing they had never seen before. In the center of the clearing stood an old, gnarled tree, its bark twisted and blackened as if it had been struck by lightning countless times. Around its roots, a series of stone markers lay half buried in the ground, arranged in a perfect circle. "Look at this," Lisa said, brushing away the dirt from one of the stones. Strange symbols were etched into its surface, symbols none of them recognized. "Maybe they're ancient," Mark suggested, "like from a long-lost civilization." Ben, the oldest and most daring of the group, stepped closer to the tree. As he did, a cold wind swept through the clearing, rustling the leaves overhead. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper seemed to emanate from the tree, growing louder the closer he got. "Do you hear that?" Ben asked, looking back at his friends. They nodded, eyes wide with a mix of curiosity and fear. "It sounds like words," Sam whispered. His voice trembled and he took a step back. But Ben was entranced. The whispers called to him, weaving promises of secrets and hidden knowledge. Before the others could stop him, he reached out and touched the tree. A shock ran through his body, and the whispers surged into his mind, drowning out everything else. He could hear them clearly now, an incomprehensible chorus of voices, all speaking at once. His vision blurred, and he stumbled back, clutching his head. "Ben, are you okay?" Emily cried, rushing to his side. He looked up at them, his eyes wide and unseeing, a strange smile spreading across his face. I know things now," he said in a voice that wasn't quite his own. "I know the truth." Over the next few days, Ben changed. He stopped speaking to his friends, spending all his time alone, muttering to himself. When he did talk, it was only to share strange, cryptic statements that made no sense. His friends grew worried, but whenever they asked what was wrong, he would only smile that eerie smile and say, "You'll see." It wasn't long before the others started hearing the whispers too. They would be playing or talking, and suddenly the world would grow distant, the voices filling their minds. Each time, they felt a pull towards the woods, towards the tree, and each time, the pull grew stronger. One by one, they returned to the clearing, drawn by the whispers they couldn't escape. Each of them touched the tree, and each of them fell under its spell. Their eyes grew vacant, and they stopped speaking in coherent sentences. They talked about the truth they had seen, about things that made no sense. They spoke of ancient beings and dark rituals, of worlds beyond the veil of reality. Their parents, growing increasingly alarmed, sought help from doctors and psychologists, but no one could explain the children's strange behavior. It was as if something had taken hold of their minds, something beyond the realm of science. The townsfolk whispered about curses and ancient spirits, recalling the old stories about the Whispering Woods. They spoke of a time, long ago, when the woods had been a place of worship for a dark cult that had sought to commune with otherworldly beings. According to the legends, the cult had been destroyed, their rituals forgotten, until now. One night, the children vanished. Their beds were empty, their windows open. Panic spread through the town as search parties combed the woods, calling their names. But no one dared venture into the clearing, not after the whispers had started echoing through the trees, growing louder and more insistent with each passing day. Then, one by one, the children returned, but they were not the same. Their eyes glowed with a strange light, and they moved with a purpose that was not their own. They spoke in unison, their voices blending together into a single chilling tone. "We are the harbingers," they said. "The gate is open. The end is near." As the townsfolk watched in horror, the children walked back into the woods, disappearing into the shadows. The whispers grew louder, spreading through the town like a plague, driving people mad with their incessant, incomprehensible words. By the time the sun rose, the town was empty, its streets silent and deserted. Only the whispers remained, echoing through the trees, promising that the end was coming, that the truth would be revealed. And in the heart of the woods, the ancient tree stood tall, its twisted branches reaching towards the sky, its roots sinking deep into the earth. The stone markers around it pulsed with a dark energy, the symbols glowing faintly in the dim light. The children stood around the tree, their eyes empty, their minds lost to the whispers. They were the harbingers, the chosen ones, the bringers of the end. And as the whispers filled the air, they smiled, for they knew the truth. They had seen beyond the veil, and there was no going back. The world was not what it seemed, and soon everyone would know the truth. The whispering woods had awoken, and nothing would ever be the same again. The house on Raven Hill. No one knew exactly why the house on Raven Hill had been abandoned. Some said the last family to live there disappeared without a trace. Others claimed they went mad and had to be taken away. The old mansion sat at the end of a winding dirt road, surrounded by tall, dying trees that loomed over it like silent sentinels. Its windows were dark and empty, its roof sagging, and its once white paint had faded to a sickly gray. For years, the townsfolk of Green Hollow avoided the house, whispering about the things that might dwell within its walls. But as always happens, the legend of the haunted house on Raven Hill became a dare among the town's children, a test of courage that no one had ever passed. Until one summer, when a group of friends decided to put the rumors to the test. Mia, Jack, Chloe, and Ryan had been best friends since they could remember. They were 11 years old, and in their minds, they were invincible. They had heard the stories about the haunted house for years, but never had the courage to see it for themselves. Until now. It was a hot August afternoon when they finally made their way up the hill, their bikes clattering over the uneven road. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the overgrown yard. The house loomed before them, its broken windows staring down like empty eyes. "I heard Mrs. Kensington, the librarian, say that anyone who goes inside never comes back," Chloe said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to sound brave. "That's just to scare us," Ryan scoffed. He was the oldest of the group and prided himself on not being afraid of anything. "It's just an old house. Probably falling apart, that's all." Mia, always the quiet one, said nothing. She stared up at the house, a feeling of unease settling in her stomach. The house seemed to watch them, waiting. "Well, let's get this over with," Jack said, trying to sound casual, but his voice betrayed a hint of nervousness. He pushed open the rusted gate, and it creaked loudly in the silence. The others followed, their footsteps crunching on the gravel path. The front door was ajar, hanging crookedly on its hinges. The children paused for a moment, exchanging uneasy glances, before Ryan pushed the door open with a loud groan. It swung inward, revealing a dark, musty hallway. The air inside was stale, thick with dust and the smell of rotting wood. Faded wallpaper peeled from the walls, and the floorboards creaked under their weight as they stepped inside. The light from their flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing cobwebs hanging like veils from the ceiling. "See? Nothing to be afraid of," Ryan said, but his voice was quieter now. The silence of the house seemed to swallow his words. They explored the first floor, finding nothing but empty rooms filled with broken furniture and dust. An old grandfather clock stood in the corner of the living room, its hands frozen at midnight. A cold draft blew through the house, rattling the broken windows. "This place is boring," Jack muttered. "Let's go upstairs." The staircase groaned under their weight as they climbed to the second floor. The hallway was narrow and dark, with doors lining both sides. A faint, musty smell permeated the air, making them wrinkle their noses. "Let's split up and check the rooms," Ryan suggested. "We'll cover more ground that way." Mia wanted to protest, to say that splitting up was a bad idea, but she didn't want to seem scared. They each took a door, disappearing into the darkness beyond. Mia's room was small and bare, with nothing but an old, dusty bed frame and a cracked mirror hanging on the wall. She shined her flashlight around, her heart pounding. There was something about the house that made her skin crawl, something she couldn't quite place. As she turned to leave, the beam of her flashlight caught something in the mirror. She froze, her blood turning to ice. Reflected in the cracked glass was a face, pale and ghostly, with hollow eyes that stared straight at her. She whipped around, but the room was empty. The hair on the back of her neck stood up, and she felt a chill run down her spine. She took a shaky step back, her eyes darting around the room. Suddenly, the door slammed shut, plunging her into darkness. She screamed, pounding on the door, but it wouldn't budge. "Ryan! Jack! Chloe!" she shouted, her voice echoing down the hallway. There was no answer, only the sound of her own breathing, loud and panicked in the silence. In the next room, Jack was looking through an old dresser when he heard Mia's scream. He rushed to the door, but it wouldn't open. He tugged at the handle, his heart racing. "Mia, are you okay?" he called, but there was no reply. The room suddenly grew cold, and he shivered, his breath visible in the air. He turned back to the dresser, and his blood ran cold. The mirror above the dresser was fogged, and as he watched, words appeared in the mist, written by an unseen hand. "Get out!" Jack stumbled back, his flashlight flickering. The room seemed to close in around him, the shadows growing darker, deeper. The air was thick with a sense of dread, and he could feel eyes watching him, waiting. Chloe was in the hallway when she heard the door slam. She turned, her flashlight shaking in her hand. The hallway stretched before her, longer than it should have been, the doors all closed. A soft, whispering sound filled the air, growing louder with each step she took. As she reached the end of the hall, she saw a figure standing in the doorway. It was a woman, her skin pale and translucent, her eyes empty. She wore a tattered dress, and her hair hung in long, dark strands over her face. "Please, help us," the woman whispered, her voice like the rustling of leaves. Chloe backed away, her heart pounding in her chest. "Who are you?" she managed to ask, her voice shaking. The woman didn't answer. She took a step forward, her hand reaching out. Chloe turned and ran, her footsteps echoing through the house. She heard the door slam behind her, the whispering growing louder, filling her mind. Ryan was in the last room, staring at a wall covered in strange symbols, drawn in a dark red substance. The symbols seemed to move, twisting and writhing like living things. He could hear voices whispering in his ear, calling his name. He turned, and his flashlight flickered, casting long shadows across the room. In the corner stood a figure, its form twisted and grotesque, its eyes glowing in the darkness. It grinned at him, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. Ryan backed away, his heart pounding. The figure stepped forward, its movements jerky, unnatural. It reached out, and the room grew colder, the air thick with the stench of decay. "Mia! Jack! Chloe!" he shouted, but his voice was swallowed by the darkness. The children ran through the house, their screams echoing in the empty rooms. The doors slammed shut behind them, trapping them inside. The whispers grew louder, filling their minds, drowning out their thoughts. They found each other in the main hall, their faces pale, their eyes wide with fear. The front door was closed, and no matter how hard they pulled, it wouldn't open. "We have to get out of here," Mia cried, tears streaming down her face. The whispers grew louder, the air thick with a sense of malice. The walls seemed to close in around them, the shadows growing darker. The house was alive, and it wanted them. Suddenly, the whispers stopped. The silence was deafening, pressing down on them like a weight. Then, from the darkness, came a voice, cold and hollow. "You should not have come here," it said. "Now you will never leave." The children turned, and their hearts froze. Standing at the top of the stairs was a figure, tall and thin, its face hidden in shadow. Its eyes glowed with a cold, malevolent light. The figure stepped forward, its movements slow, deliberate. The air grew colder, and the children could feel a dark presence pressing down on them, suffocating them. They backed away, their hearts pounding, their minds screaming for escape. But there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The house was a maze, and the figure was always there, waiting in the shadows. The last thing they heard was the sound of their own screams, echoing through the darkness. The house on Raven Hill stood silent and empty, its windows dark and empty. The townsfolk whispered about the children who had gone missing, about the strange lights they sometimes saw flickering in the windows. But no one dared to go near, for they knew that the house was haunted, that it was alive. And the children, they were never seen again. But sometimes, late at night, if you listen closely, you can hear their voices, whispering in the darkness, calling for help that will never come.